Hey, how you doing? I have something to show you here. It's a passbook. If you were African during colonialism, you would have to carry one of these around, and you would have to produce it at every check stop. You couldn't move from one part of the country to the other, even for work or whatever, or see your family, without having one of these, because you would be stopped at a checkpoint, and if you didn't have it, you would be sent back, or perhaps even imprisoned, or something like that. This is the real thing. This was by someone named Mwangi Wanyinyi, um, and it's kind of falling apart here, so I'll see if I can show it to you without, there's a lot of glare here, sorry about that. That's the front page of the passbook, and as you would go through checkpoints, you would have to be signed off on little lines like this. And so what you see here is, you see who this is, what the checkpoint is, the reason for his moving around. So, he's going to see his sick mother in one case, in another case he's going for work and things of that nature. So that's the kind of thing that you would have to deal with if you were African. And it raises a question, I think, which is really kind of germane. It's probably come up in some of your minds already as well, and that is, who is African? I mean, I asked you last week or the week before, where is Africa? And now we have the question, who is African? And the answer to that might not be as straightforward as it seems. We might want to say that anyone who's black is African, and anyone who's not black is not African. But that clearly doesn't actually work all that well. I mean, there are a lot of people who are part of the African diaspora, African Americans, Africans living in the UK, wherever. They may have some cultural ties or history with Africa, but they've never lived there, and their family may not have lived there for, in some cases, hundreds of years. Add to that there are, if you wish, black people, however we define that, elsewhere in the world who have no ties to the African continent whatsoever. And I'm thinking of people like Australian Aborigines. If you use an indicator like blackness, the physiognomic category of blackness, that really doesn't tell you very much. And that's really the problem here. The term black is a very vague and problematic category. It's not really clear that it has any biological meaning at all, even though in the 19th century people very much wanted it to, because they wanted to somehow justify why Europe was so much better in every possible way than the rest of the world was. And so if you do that racially, that's a very handy way to do it. But what this does is it points to one particular physiognomic feature, but allows the others to recede into the background. If you want an idea of how problematic this category of black is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in another video, consider what happened during the Rwandan genocide. Up to 1 million people are slaughtered in the space of 100 days, starting in 1994, April 6th, 1994, 8:30 at night. To an outsider's eye, most Rwandans would look alike, but within Rwanda there was a keen sense of the differences between Hutu and Tutsi. In the minds of extremist Hutus, Tutsis were all outsiders, all foreigners, and you could tell that by how they looked. Never mind the fact that the categories of Hutu and Tutsi aren't really tribal categories at all, but really are just as much associated with economic groups. You could, in fact, move between these groups depending on whether you were a farmer or a herder, and depending on how wealthy you were. So, the categories which seem like they're going to tell us something about who these people really are, really don't tell us very much at all. And the category of black is also very much related to the country in which you are and the history of that country. I mean, in the US, for example, there was what they call the one-drop rule. If you had 1 drop of African blood, you're black. In Brazil, categories are totally different. No one-drop rule at all. South Africa, different again. The very same person could be considered black in the US, white in Brazil, and colored in South Africa. So what does the category black mean under those circumstances? So maybe being black isn't a good enough measure given the vagueness of the term. But could non-black people be African? Well, again, we're relying on what black means, so it's hard to answer that question. But consider this. North and East Africa have had a strong Arab influence for at least 1,500 years. Same with what parts of West Africa. In some places, Indians and Europeans have lived in Africa for hundreds of years. And unless we're willing to be consistent, we would have to affirm that almost everyone in North America is not American, since this was Native American or First Nations land. We're all immigrants, settlers, colonizers, really. None of this means that those who can trace their heritage in a place for hundreds or even thousands of years should not have some sort of priority. What it does mean is that no category is permanent and unchanging, and it's going to be very difficult to use a category for very much. Because of all of this, we sometimes use different sets of categories. We may, in fact, for example, talk about settlers and indigenous people. We might talk about colonizers and colonized. These distinctions might help in some cases, but they don't necessarily settle the question. Some of these settlers might have been there for hundreds of years. I've talked to Afrikaan young people, and they're trying to figure out their place in contemporary South Africa. Some of their parents supported a racist regime, but many of them wanted no place in that. Nevertheless, they have sometimes benefited from privileges that white South Africaners have had. They have never known anything but South Africa as their home. Are they really invaders? Are they not welcome? The ANC has made it clear, all are welcome. And yet, are they real Africans or are they not? This is a live question for them. The colonizer-colonized distinction can also be problematic, since in the wake of independence movements, some indigenous people and some indigenous groups have benefited a great deal more than others. Land redistribution, for example, after independence, just sometimes shifted choice land from colonizers and white farmers to a privileged elite. Didn't help those whose land it had been before colonization at all. In other words, someone who was in the category of colonized may well have all the attributes of a colonizer and all the privileges. All this might mean that the question of who is African might not be the right one to ask. It's tempting because it seems to suggest a nice, clear answer. If only we could identify that these people are in and these people are out, we'd be able to sort a whole lot of things out. And yet nowhere in the world do things sort themselves out quite that easily. And in fact, maybe they shouldn't. Every culture is in the process of change in a world defined by other cultures. The idea that we could fix a point in history and we could say these people belong in this place and these don't, and then use that to say who is a real African and who isn't, just really doesn't seem possible.